Hello. My talk today is on, I'm Rebecca, sorry. My talk today is on accessibility and neurodivergence. I don't have any slides because originally I didn't think that my talk would lend itself to slides, and right as I hit the point where it was too late to make them, I realised actually I was wrong. So pretend I do. And hopefully what I say will make sense. As soon as I stand up in front of a group of people, everything I know falls out of my head, so I do have notes. So I am sorry if I look down a lot. So accessibility is, it's a big part of all of our jobs, making content and learning available and accessible to as wide an audience as possible. And I think a big topic that is kind of becoming more talked about in recent years is neurodivergence. I just wanted to start with like a quick definition of neurodiversity and neurodivergence, because sometimes they're used interchangeably. They're not the same thing. So neurodiversity is just how, as a group, as a collective, we all have brains that work in different ways. And neurodivergence specifically is about what's considered atypical brain function. So the kind of opposite term to that is neurotypical. There are lots of different types of neurodivergence. The most commonly recognized ones are autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia, which I recently learned is also called developmental coordination disorder. So each naturally impacts people differently, including their needs when it comes to accessibility. The things I will be talking about will mostly cover digital content and learning, but some things can also apply elsewhere. So obviously we have standards like WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines for digital content. I absolutely love them. They are my kind of go-to for any piece of content that I make. They are a great way, obviously, to make your content more accessible to a wider audience. They really do. And they do actually take neurodivergence into consideration. But one thing that I do say all the time is it's not possible to make a single piece of content with static settings, which I'll come back to, 100% accessible to 100% of people. And so I've been really interested in looking at ways we can change that. And neurodivergence is a fantastic example of that. So one of my favorite resources for when I've been kind of looking into this is and I will have to definitely look at my notes for this, the Hassel Inclusion Autism Accessibility Guidelines Research Project, carried out by Hassel Inclusion for the National Autistic Society in 2019. I won't go into too many details, there's a lot to it. They come out with a lot of fantastic recommendations. I wholly recommend looking into it if you're interested. I have the link, I'm happy to share it, as well as any of the other resources that I found along my journey. I will add the caveat that, just like many different things, autism is a spectrum. And so not every autistic person has the same preferences or in every way. However, there were some things that were shared by all or most of the autistic people in this study, which they called shared preferences, and I'm just going to say that because I'll mention it in a minute, which did inform the recommendations that they made in their report. And there were some also interesting preferences that didn't quite fit with like typical accessibility guidelines. They weren't necessarily part of the shared preferences, but small numbers of people did prefer them. So there were things like colour contrast. So obviously, standard recommendations are that there is a high contrast between background and foreground colours. However, there were actually individuals in this study who came out and said that they preferred a low contrast, like a dark background with a low contrast text colour like grey, or even a dark blue background with black text. They also generally, as a shared preference, prefer muted colours, which are a bit harder to create contrast with. Some users also preferred serif fonts. Obviously, normal recommendations are sans serif because they are generally easier to read, but some people did prefer serif fonts. And if moving on out of this project, You also have conditions like dyslexia. You have specific fonts like the dyslexia font, which is designed to give the letters heavier bottoms and they're more spaced out, among other things. Also, other things that are preferred or make things more accessible for people with dyslexia are like coloured screens or coloured backgrounds, because they can help them read the text. Also, you have those with dyspraxia. They can struggle to use like keyboards and mice, and there are like kind of real world things that you can do in their kind of workspace, like ergonomic keyboards and slowing down the mouse speed that can help. But on the screen, you can also help with things like not making buttons too small, not relying on like hover states to reveal information, and things like that. There are also like common things that came up among most, if not all, types of neurodivergence that mostly do fit in with kind of standard accessibility guidelines. So things like auto-playing items, don't have them at all. A lot of it kind of creates problems, distractions. But definitely, if you have to have an auto-playing item, give people the ability to stop it, and just generally provide controls for any piece of media that needs to be played. If there is no need for something to be moving, it's kind of purely a design choice, make it static. It doesn't need to move. Clearly separate your design elements on the page with sufficient space between them, but not too much. Lay items out logically on the page. Keep things simple, both in terms of what you include on a page, but also generally don't overcomplicate things like menu systems, like including too many items. Keep language simple, like avoid using jargon and saying things in an overcomplicated way, something I am personally not very good at. Allow extra time to complete tasks. Add closed captions to videos with the ability to turn them on and off. And provide alternative formats for information where you can, and for information to be shared elsewhere. For example, the ability to email something to yourself to read it at a later date when you've got more time, or you're, just generally, I think some people mentioned going from like a phone screen to being able to then send it to themselves so they can read it on their computer. Also, I've heard kind of an anecdote of a fantastic example of somebody, she's autistic, and she likes to print off the transcripts from e-learning courses and highlight things that are relevant so she can refer back to them at other times, like when she's in meetings and things, which I thought was a fantastic use of just an extra little bit of content that you can provide with very little effort. I think the reason I wanted to talk about this is quite easy. Like, a lot of this stuff is not new to any of you, I'm sure, in terms of general accessibility, but it is quite common and really easy to think about physical impairments when it comes to accessibility, like you're providing closed captions or a transcript for those who have hearing impairments, or your font choice and colour contrast are considered for those with visual impairments, but these things can also benefit people who are neurodivergent or have other cognitive conditions, and as we've seen, actually sometimes they can almost hinder like with the colour contrast. One thing that did come up that I thought was really interesting and refers back to my static settings point is a really common thing in the National Autistic Society Hassle Inclusion Report was the ability to control things. So this does really only apply to digital content, but I think this is where we can really increase the accessibility of single pieces of content further. And that is outside of autism. It's not just for that, although that came out of that report. Giving people the option to change font or font size, adjust background colour or overall colour scheme, hide items like decorative images on the page if they're not needed, control whether media plays or not, whether accessibility measures are activated, like the closed captions. All these things can make things a lot more enjoyable, or certainly a lot less stressful for people to use them. For example, being able to choose a more readable font or background colour will help make a massive difference to somebody with dyslexia, as well as obviously the autism points I raised earlier. Hiding or stopping media or the ability to turn on closed captions for audio content will massively help somebody with ADHD. And making those controls really easily accessible and clearly visible is also super important. The changes can be quick and easy or less quick and easy depending on the format and tools that you use, but they are worth making wherever you can. And of course, these things aren't limited to learning content. Things like internal communications, general resources, general settings on company devices can also benefit. And as we learn more and more about different neurodivergent conditions, we can work towards making the workplace a more inclusive environment for them, and start to address the issue of many neurodivergent people struggling to keep or get full-time employment, because that is a big issue that has been coming out. The exact figures depend on kind of where you get your information, but accessible learning content is just one step in achieving that.